All right, hi everyone. I'm trying out a new system here, so hopefully it works out for recording these lectures. But this is chapter 34, Plant Form and Function. And in this chapter, we're going to be looking at specifically the really anatomy of the plants and how the various structures of plants allow them to absorb sunlight, as shown in the figure, and nutrients from the soil, as well as water from the soil. Okay. So a little introduction here to what plants do in general. We've discussed already kind of that plants make their own food through photosynthesis. All right, so photosynthesis, again, is the process of taking sun's energy, taking carbon dioxide, converting it into sugars. Another characteristic of plants, they stay in one place. All right, so unlike animals, they don't move. They extend their roots and shoots, roots being the underground components of the plant, and shoots being the above ground components. So the leaves, the stems, all those things are shoots. And the real goal of each of these is to harvest resources from the environment. The structure of a plant's body is dynamic. So most plants are going to grow throughout their entire life, meaning they exhibit indeterminate growth. So there really is no end goal. If the conditions are perfect, theoretically a plant would grow forever and ever and ever. All right. So even though a plant body does not move in the same sense as an animal body, it doesn't mean it's not dynamic, and it doesn't mean that it's not changing with the environment. So we're also going to look at a few fundamental questions in this chapter, specifically focusing on angiosperms, all right, being those flowering plants that really dominate. So how is the plant body organized? Why are plants so diverse in their size and shape? How do plants grow throughout their lives? So all of these things are going to be looked at in this lecture. All right, so plants use light energy to synthesize carbon dioxide from the air and water from the soil. We know this is fundamentals of photosynthesis. The structures that are above ground are really going to be involved in photosynthesis, whereas the structures below ground are going to be involved in taking the water and nutrients from the soil, which makes sense. Plants must also take in various nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, in from the soil. So we see that plants that are lacking these essential nutrients in their soil are not going to grow properly. They're going to be yellow. They're going to really exhibit characteristics, and you can tell if you're a farmer, if you're a gardener, if your soil is lacking nitrogen or phosphorus, what those telltale sites are in the plants. These elements, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, are going to be existing in nature as dissolved ions in the soil water. And we're going to look at next chapter how specifically we take those ions out of the water. So how is the plant body organized? So we've got our roots and we've got our shoots. So below ground, we've got the root system, anchoring the plant, taking in water and nutrients from the soil. Above ground, we've got the shoot system that harvests light and carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to do photosynthesis. You got roots and you got shoots. You got your roots below ground, you got your shoots above ground. Distinctly and morphologically different in the way that they look, but essentially the same goal of each. So in each of these, they're going to have a really large surface area to volume ratio because they're going to be taking something in. Below ground, we're taking in water and nutrients, okay, and below and above ground, we are taking in the carbon dioxide and the sunlight to produce sugars. So together, the roots and the shoots collectively make up the plant body. All right, so this figure is going to come back again in a second, but just to point out some of these major structures we talked about. So everything above ground here makes up the shoots, and everything below ground down here makes up the roots. Okay, notice that there's this, down the center, we've got this central taproot, and then we've got these lateral roots coming off, and these lateral roots are going to increase the surface area here. And depending on the type of plant, we're going to see that there's different, ways in which these roots are arranged. It just all depends on the environment. All right. But above ground, we've got some various structures that we're going to get into. Notice that the leaves are like, almost like solar panels. That's going to be important in a second. We've also got a few other things here. We've got the apical bud at the top. Notice apex, apical. That's where growth is going to take place at the top. We've got nodes. Okay, we've got a node here. We've got a node here. We've got areas where we're going to have leaves branching off, and those are going to be nodes. And in between those nodes, we have internodes. And again, we're going to talk about this in a few later slides. So it's very important that we discuss the surface area to volume relationship when it comes to plants. All right, because plants are going to be absorbing lots and lots of sunlight, carbon dioxide, and nutrients. So specifically, the roots are going to take in water and key nutrients, whereas the main function of the shoots is to absorb light and carbon dioxide. All right. Even when we're talking about, say, the digestive system in an animal or even in a fungi, absorption is going to have to take place over a surface. So if you're talking about a surface that's got a lot of high surface area but a small volume, that's going to be the most efficient. So if you picture a leaf, right, a leaf has got a whole lot of surface area, but it really doesn't take up a whole lot of volume. It's flat. All right, so that's going to be the ideal condition. You wouldn't want to have, boxy leaves or short boxy leaves. That wouldn't really make sense, right? You want to have a flat panel that's going to take in as much sunlight as possible relative to its overall volume. So the roots, a little bit different. We've got the taproot, which is that large central root that I talked about, and then increasing the surface area off of the taproot are many lateral roots. So what do roots do? They anchor the plant to the soil, they absorb ions and water from the soil, they conduct water and ions from the soil up into the shoot system, all right? And then the other way around as well. So the roots take energy from the sugars that are produced from photosynthesis up in the shoots. So if you think about it, you're at the leaves, you're doing photosynthesis, you're producing sugars. Those sugars then have to get stored somewhere. So what they do is they end up going down into the roots and get stored in the roots, the sugars, for long-term storage. So something like a potato, which is a root, is a large source of starch, which is going to be a plant's major source of energy, stored carbohydrates, and that is stored in the roots. And so now potatoes are roots. All right, so this picture is just showing you the comparison of the various types of roots that you'll see for different plants. Notice that for the long grass, very small roots, and then certain other plants have really dense arrangements. The compass plant here has got a very long taproot, very strong anchors. So you may have, again, if you have a garden, you may try to pull out sometimes some weeds, and they're really tough to pull out. They may have these really long taproots anchored, or really dense fibrous roots here. So switchgrass has really dense fibrous roots, right? So it all depends on how the plant has adapted, the type of soil that's available, and the nutrient availability. It may be that for this type of plant that the nutrients are very, very deep down, so the roots have to grow really deep, right? Whereas lawn grass, for example, doesn't require a whole lot of nutrients. Everything's up at the surface. Okay, so this is really interesting too, because it allows different types of plants to coexist in the same area, right? Because they're not taking nutrients from the same areas, and they may need different nutrients. So really amazing that we see this diversity in roots. So in terms of the shoots, so those are all the roots. Now let's look at the shoots. Lots of anatomical features here. So I mentioned some of this already, but we've got the stems being the vertical above ground structures of nodes where leaves are attached. Okay, in between those nodes, we've got internodes. Right. Coming off of the nodes, there's these little buds, these axillary or lateral buds where growth is going to take place. So if the conditions are right, they're going to grow into a branch. All right. The apical bud, or the apex of the plant, is also going to contain this bud as well, where growth is going to take place, making the plant longer. And both of these apical and axillary buds can develop into flowers. So here's that picture again, and you can see pretty straightforward here the different parts for you to reference. So just notice, know the difference between a node, right, where these leaves are going to branch off. The actual growth takes place at a bud, okay, so the buds come off of the nodes, and then in between we've got our internodes. So internode here and internode here in between the nodes. Okay, you got your apical bud at the top, and growth is going to take place appositionally that way. Okay, so if we focus just on the leaf, where most of the photosynthesis occurs, we see that the leaf's very large surface area is great for absorbing photons and supporting photosynthesis, which makes sense. A simple leaf is going to have two main structures, an expanded blade and a stalk called a petiole. If we look at a compound leaf, the blade is going to be divided into a series of leaflets. So it's still going to have one petiole, but it's just going to have multiple blades coming off of it. So it's going to be a compound leaf, but still considered one leaf. We're going to look later at needle-leg leaves that actually reduce water loss by transpiration. So these needle-leg leaves still do photosynthesis. They just don't have that as much of a large platform for it, because they're going to be in areas where there's not a whole lot of sunlight anyway. So the trade-off there is going to be less photosynthesis but better retention of water. Okay, so here's our 4 different types of leaves we've talked about. So your In part A, you got your simple leaf. Notice it's just got a petiole and one blade. And then the compound leaf has the petiole and then multiple leaflets coming off of it. But still, believe it or not, this is just considered one leaf by definition. And then here you've got your compound leaves branching off into further compound leaves. Again, this is just one leaf, pretty amazingly, but it's doubly compound, and these are little leaflets coming off of the original leaf. Needle-like leaves, pine needles, you see, are adapted to very cold or very hot climates to conserve water. Okay. So in addition to having different compound and simple leaves, you can also see the leaves arranged differently. So I'd suggest if you get a chance and you're kind of interested in this stuff, if you wanted to go outside, and you could probably find a good amount of these leaves out in your backyard if you're in an area that has leaves, or around your park, and try to identify some of these. So leaves can be on either side of a stem. They can be paired opposite or alternating. They can be arranged in a whorl, right around a circular, or they can be in a rosette growth form, where the internodes are really, really short, and you'll see those like on weeds a lot of times in the sidewalk. All right, so here's your alternating leaves, part A. Okay, notice they go kind of back and forth. You've got your opposite leaves, and the opposite leaves are going to be going, identically. Whorled leaves go around in a circle, and then you've got your rosette leaves here as well on a very short node there. Okay, so plant cells. I'm sure you've learned about eukaryotic cells in Biology 1 or in a high school biology course at some point. You may have to dig back. But a plant cell is a eukaryotic cell, meaning it has a nucleus, all right? But they're very unique from animal cells. They have extra structures that animal cells don't have, and one of those is the primary cell wall. So all plant cells have a primary cell wall. Some, like we talked about last week, that are involved in transport, and the vasculature of a plant, those have that secondary cell wall made out of lignin, right? So we saw that with the tracheid cells in the last week's lectures. Plant cells are connected and communicate with each other through plasmodesmata, okay, which is a type of junction between the cells that allow for water, nutrients to flow through from cell to cell. All right? So here's a very basic look at the plant cell. Notice we've got the nucleus, we've got endoplasmic reticulum, major structures here being the chloroplast and the central vacuole. Chloroplast is involved in photosynthesis. Central vacuole stores water and allows this plant cell to contract much more easily and push water out of it. All right, this figure here is just showing you one cell connected to a second plant cell, and they're connected via this gap junction, this plasmodesmata, and nutrients can flow through the plasmodesmata from cell to cell. All right. Like I said, plant cells, distinguishing feature are those chloroplasts where photosynthesis takes place. So photosynthesis takes place in these structures. So notice that they're green. So you're not going to find chloroplasts anywhere in the plant that's not green. So you're not going to find chloroplasts in the roots. You're only going to find them in the shoots, specifically the leaves, where you're going to find the most photosynthetic cells. All right. This is interesting. Non-photosynthetic cells in a plant may actually have organelles similar to chloroplasts, but they're modified for the storage of excess pigment, starch, oil, and proteins, right? So you're only going to find functional chloroplasts in the shoots where photosynthesis is happening. Okay. Vacuoles contain an aqueous solution called cell sap and store water, waste, and nutrients. Okay. So this is where I'm going to end this part 1 of this chapter's lecture.